Hello and good morning. I think we're all excited to learn from Dan Alexander today about azaleas, rhodos, and camellias. So why don't you go ahead and take us away?
Thank you very much. Uh, Today, we're going to chit chat about the acid lovers, some of the acid lovers. There are many of them. But the most spectacular, I suppose, in terms of flowers are the azaleas, camellias, and rhododendrons. So we kind of lump them together because culturally they require many of the same elements. They're not all related. The azaleas and rhododendrons are all of the species or the genus rhododendron, but camellias are unrelated. And camellias have a little more tolerance for different soils, dryness, that sort of thing than azaleas and rhododendrons. But it's nice to talk about them together. A lot of what we say here could also be applied to gardenias, for instance, and to some of the relatives of the rhododendrons like pyrrhus, other acid lovers like Mahonias, or Berberis, and even your boxwood hedge prefers an acidic environment, even though they can grow out in the full sun just fine. So there are some interesting elements that everybody has in common. The title picture here is a Western azalea, which is a native California azalea. This picture was taken in Sonoma County, but they are pretty common along river courses and stream courses, and especially in the lower Sierra Nevada. You'll find lots of them blooming in the spring. They're kind of ephemeral. The blooms don't last a long time, and the plants themselves are not spectacular looking shrubbery. They're kind of tall, gangly, and skinny. But the flowers are absolutely spectacular, and they're often fragrant. And if you run across them, you'll want to go back and see them each year. We're going to break this down into sort of categories that kind of make sense. Rhododendrons, then evergreen and deciduous azaleas, and then the most common kinds of camellias. The japonicas have big green glossy leaves and big flowers. Sasanquas have smaller leaves, smaller flowers, bloom earlier. And then in the recent years, there have been a lot of hybrid camellias that have started to become available. And they have some of the characteristics of both japonicas and sasanquas, usually a little bit smaller leaves, but larger and more complex flowers than most of the sasanquas. And then we'll talk about some of the requirements and a way to make them grow nicely, and we'll talk about a few of the problems that they have and what to do about those. The principal thing that sets them apart is that they like an acidic soil, more acidic than is common. Every plant, probably, well, with a few exceptions, does better with a slightly acidic soil because the nutrients are more available to them. An alkaline soil holds on to the nutrients and the plants can't wrestle them away from the soil. A slightly acidic soil to neutral soil is what we usually strive for. But in the case of camellias and azaleas and rhododendrons, we want a more acid soil. And the way we get that is to add lots of organic matter and then usually use a fertilizer that has either cottonseed meal or sulfur in it that will help acidify on a regular basis. The reason we need to do something like that is that our soils in the Bay Area are generally slightly alkaline, not always. Our water is definitely alkaline if you're using city water. Um, it's intentionally made alkaline so that it doesn't eat your pipes up. And that's a good thing, obviously. But it adds the alkalinity when you water during the summer. Uh, and so for most acid-loving plants, some additional acidity being added will be very helpful to them. This is in the picture is the E.B. Stone organic Azalea camellia and acid planting mix or potting soil. It can be used either as a potting soil or mixed with your soil in the ground and will help acidify and add lots of organic matter. Uh, and I find that the plants like it pretty well. Um, there are undoubtedly other acidic mixes around. So if you go to someplace other than slope to find your soil, look for something that's designed for acid-loving plants. And in terms of fertilizers, there are many choices, but the E.B. Stone Azalea Camellia gardenia food is a good one. You can also use a liquid if it says that it's for acid lovers, or you can use the kelp-based fertilizers that are designed for acid lovers. They might have a picture of a gardenia or a blue hydrangea. That's often a tip-off that it's designed for acid lovers because blue hydrangeas need an acid soil to stay blue. And without in an alkaline soil, they'll turn pink. Solpo Mag is a nice addition to the soil. It has sulfur is the sol part, potassium and magnesium. The 0020 means there's no nitrogen, no phosphorus, but lots of potash, which is what potassium comes from. And adding the Solpo Mag to the soil maybe twice a year, fall and spring, would be a good addition for your acid lovers. Or you can, if they're in pots, you can just sprinkle it into the pot, scratch it in and water it in, and it'll help acidify. This is some imaginary place where rhododendrons grow wild. It's actually it's supposed to represent the foothills of the Himalayas, with the Himalayas in the background there. I don't know if it's a real picture or not, but the idea here is that rhododendrons are in fact from the foothills of the Himalayas. There are many, many, many species of rhododendrons, and they're not exclusively Himalayan. They have worldwide distribution, including natives in America and natives in California as well. In addition to the Western azalea, we have the California rhododendron. But the vast majority and most of the ones that are used for hybridizing our garden rhododendrons come from the Himalayas. So we can imagine ourselves trekking along through forests of rhododendrons, some of which can grow as decent-sized trees. And they don't usually get that big around the Bay Area because of our particularly dry, warm summer. But in other areas of the world, they can get very big. Even Oregon and Washington, if you go to a botanical garden there, you will be walking under a canopy of giant rhododendrons very easily that you probably won't ever see around here. Oh, I just bebopped my ability to change slides here, so I'm gonna have to, there we go. Rhododendron hybrids have some of the most spectacular flowers that we can have in our gardens. This is Anakrushki, which is a very old variety. And most of the hybrids that we find in the nurseries will grow to, 4 to 8 feet tall and wide, kind of rounded. They all bloom in the very, very late winter, early spring, and have a fairly long blooming period. The blooms all form on the ends of new growth and make great big flower buds that then swell and open up with some color showing first, like this one that's working to open up and then opening up into the big open flowers. Rhododendrons generally have smooth leaves and 10 stamens, the stamens in here. Their cousins, the azaleas, usually have hairy leaves and 5 stamens. And that's the kind of the principal easy way to tell the difference. They're all of the genus Rhododendron. So they're pretty closely related, first cousins, I guess you might say. Anna Rose Whitney is another beautiful old hybrid rhododendron that does very, very well in the garden, and with the kind of creamy and pink coloration, one of the best. And this is unique, which is a little bit newer variety, but sometimes it's described as yellow, but I think that's inaccurate. This is a pretty good representation of the color, which is really white on the inside, pink on the outside of the bud, and a little bit of yellow and chartreusey look in the middle. Most rhododendrons and azaleas have a spotted area on the I don't know what you call it, sort of the dorsal petal, the one that sticks straight up. And there's usually some kind of freckling or mottling on the inside of that, which can be very interesting. And it's usually a contrasting color, obviously, or you wouldn't even see it. But that's one of the descriptors of the flowers that might say that it has a purple flower with a yellow mottling. Now this picture is designed to show you kind of how the rhododendrons grow up and the different sizes that you'd probably typically find in a nursery. You can see how from the smaller one to the middle one to the larger one, they just kind of grow symmetrically in all directions, putting out more and more stems, and each of the terminal buds can become a flower bearer. They aren't all going to have flower buds on them. And you can kind of see the difference. Maybe I can expand this a little bit. This is a flower bud forming here, and you can see it's kind of big and rounded. And some of these may be forming flower buds, but most of them are probably leaf buds, and they're skinny and very pointy. And that's part of the way that you can tell that you have flower buds there rather than just leaf buds. Also, this one, for instance, it has a couple of flower bud or leaf buds next to what is probably forming a flower bud here. And that's a typical structure where you'll have the flower bud in the middle and then some leaf buds outside it. Nominally, this is a 2-gallon container, a 5-gallon container, and a 15-gallon container. I say nominally because that's what we call them in the trade. They're not really that volume exactly. They're usually something less than that. But if you ask for a 2-gallon, that'll probably be about the smallest that's likely to be of a blooming size. A 1-gallon would be considerably smaller than that and might be available, but probably wouldn't be blooming yet. So they're not as commonly found. Let's see, I think that's probably sufficient for that one. And here we've lined up a few azaleas in front of the same rhododendrons just to show you kind of the difference in scale and size between the azaleas and rhododendrons. A 1-gallon azalea, a 2-gallon, and a 5-gallon. You generally won't find azaleas in 15-gallon size. So 5s are going to be about the largest you'll run into. And you can see they grow kind of similarly. They grow out fairly symmetrically in all directions and top out about half or less the size of a rhododendron, depending on the variety of azalea. Some of them are extremely compact and don't get very big at all, and others are a little rangier like this. They put on more growth each year and they'll get up. Azaleas can get up 6 feet over many years, but more often you'll see them in the 2 to 4 foot height and width range. Their flowers come in a wide range of colors, as do the rhododendrons, but they start with white and go through pinks and mottled shades and reds, and then the rhododendrons continue into violets and purples and almost blues, and the deciduous azaleas get into yellows and oranges that are extremely pretty, in addition to the pinks and the reds and kind of rusty orange colors, that sort of thing. Azaleas, there are thousands of varieties, named varieties of azaleas. They've been cultivated and hybridized largely in Japan for eons, and weren't really brought over to the United States, and as I understand it, until the late 1800s, where they started to become very popular. This is what's called a Belgian indica azalea, or a florist azalea, you might want to call it. These are azaleas that can't handle super cold weather, but in the Bay Area, we don't have super cold weather, so they do fine here. They're a little tough to grow unless you give them plenty of water in the summer, and you need to keep them in mottled shade or just morning sun. They can't take the hot midday to early afternoon sun that we have around here in the summer. They don't have any problem in the winter. A few plants do with the sun, but in the summer it can get pretty brutal for them. And there are azaleas that we'll talk about that can handle more sun than these. But if somebody gives you a gift of a azalea fully blooming in a 6-inch pot or so, it's probably a Belgian indica. And after you have it in the house for a little while, you can set it outside in the pot or plant it out in the garden, and it'll do fine as long as you water it and give it a little fertilizer and kind of keep the idea in mind that it's an acid lover. Oh, and there's even a title there that I wasn't showing you, Inga. When you plant azaleas or rhododendrons in particular, it's crucial that the crown of the plant, which is where the stem meets the soil, is able to drain. And my solution for that, at sometimes if I'm in a really heavy clay soil situation, I plant them right on top of the ground and just mound soil up around them, so that I know they'll be able to drain. Um, a good soil mixture when you do that, believe it or not, is to take some fine bark and some lava rock, red or black lava rock, with just a little bit of the azalea mix, maybe a third, a third, a third, and use that as your soil medium. And that will help you a lot if you're in a really heavy clay soil environment. It's difficult to turn a heavy clay soil into a relatively light, well-draining soil that they need without lifting the plant up so that at least the crown is able to drain and dry out a little bit, because the clay soil holds so much moisture for so long that they just stay too wet. So that's one idea. And even an inch or so above soil grade will be helpful for them. There's really no reason with azaleas and rhododendrons ever to plant them all the way down. I would always leave an inch or more of the original root ball above soil level, and then just mulch or make the soil mixture and mound it up to the edges of the root ball. Don't cover the root ball with other soil, because then you're defeating the purpose and you're taking the air and light away from the crown area, which you want to be able to dry out. Mulch should always be pulled back a few inches from where the trunk meets the soil. Um, uh, Azaleas called southern indicas have been developed to take more heat and direct sun than just about any other kind of azalea. And there are lots and lots of nice varieties that are called southern indicas. This one's called Formosa. Has another name. I can't remember it right now, in addition to Formosa, but you'll usually see it labeled Formosa, even if the other name is on it. The southern indicas are hybrids that were originally developed to grow in the southern United States, which, although hot, is much more humid than the Bay Area. And so even southern indicas can't be grown out in the full hot sun in the Bay Area. Our summer is just too dry, not just the soil, but the air is too dry for them to flourish out in the hot afternoon sun. So again, you can have them in more direct sun than something like a Belgian indica, but not full sun. And a certain amount of experimentation is usually needed to figure out just how much sun a particular plant can handle, and you have to be prepared to change your mind about where it's going to go if it's not thriving, or change your mind about what you're going to be able to grow in that spot if it's not thriving there.
You know, Dan, real quick, if you don't mind going back to the slide you just moved from, I think that picture has a really great illustration of what you were talking about earlier in terms of the leaves being a little bit hairier on the azalea plants than on the rhodos.
Yeah,
And
yeah, you can see the hairiness on these, um, and it's true that if you look at any of the azaleas, you'll find fine hairs on the leaves, and if we count the stamens here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe it's a little hard to tell. This picture makes it look like there are more, but some of these spots probably aren't stamens. But yeah, there you have it. And you have a nice view of the mottling on the dorsal fin here. Yeah. Yeah,
awesome.
good call.
Thank
Um, this is another southern indica called George Tabor, which is one of my favorites. Very, very pretty, kind of pink to lilac-y looking colors, and one of the most prolific bloomers you'll run into. Um, it's an old variety, and I remember running into it in the 70s when I first got working in the nursery arena, and it continues to be one of the best around. Um, then there are some smaller azaleas. This is not really designed to be a picture of a park bench, although it's lovely. Where Smith and Hawken when we need them. But this is probably a Kurumi azalea. Kurumis are not a dwarf exactly, but a much more compact type of azalea with a smaller flower, mostly reddish in color. Kurumi is a city in Japan, but it's also, as I understand it, the word for the 5th lunar month in the calendar, and had to do with when Kurumi azaleas bloom, which is about June or so, generally speaking. Kurumis are beautifully compact, make a lovely border kind of plant, and are just covered with flowers when they bloom. And they can be made into bonsais and various things, but in the garden, they're maybe 2 feet tall and 2 to 4 feet wide, and have kind of a mounding look to them. And you'll see them a lot in Japanese gardens, maybe in the tea garden in San Francisco, likely to find a lot of Kurumi azaleas. So keep your eyes out for them. They will have names like Ward's Ruby, Hino Crimson, Hino Dagiri, but they'll probably say Kurumi on them as well. This is just a pretty picture of a Kurumi, probably Kurumi bonsai. I didn't take this picture, but I was fortunate enough to be in Kyoto for my nephew's wedding many years ago, and bumbled into an exhibit of bonsai during the blooming season, and there were many azaleas, absolutely gorgeous. I can't imagine how old this one is with the trunk this big, but probably pretty old. Now, this is spectacular deciduous azalea. The Rothschild Exbury estate in England was a center for hybridizing deciduous azaleas. So they're called Exbury azaleas, many of the strains. And there are others like Knapp Hill azaleas. They're true azaleas. They have hairy leaves. They have 5 stamens. They have spectacular colors, and they lose their leaves in the winter. So they look different. They generally are more upright than the evergreen azaleas, a little more stick-like, not as dense, and maybe not so much a border type plant as a background spectacular plant that will burst into bloom in the spring and then kind of disappear into the background when it's out of bloom, and during the winter when it's lost its leaves, it won't be the focal point of the garden. But when it's blooming, it will be. And if you make a drift of these in the background with maybe some dark foliage behind it, you can have a really spectacular look. They have the same requirements: part sun, plenty of water in the summer, an acidic soil, and are pretty readily available either at your local garden center or by mail order. It's not too hard to get them through the mail. They'll be small in the mail, but they're worth waiting for. This is another deciduous azalea, I don't think I labeled it, so I can't remember which one it is, but it's another X-berry. And you can see the complexity, both this has double flowers, so some of the stamens, you can see they're invisible now. They've been turned into petals by selective breeding. You keep growing them out from seed, and you pick the ones that maybe one of the stamens has become a petal, and so you stick with that one, you breed that one again, and then maybe two of them, and finally you get it so that it's fully double like this, and you have 5 extra petals in addition to the original 5 that were there, and then a kind of complex color arrangement, and many, many generations of growing them out and then growing their seeds and selecting the ones that you like from that. So it's not a matter of playing around with their genetics as much as uh, seeing how much variation is naturally there and selecting out the parts of that natural variation that you like and that you want to reproduce if you can, and then maybe mix with some other parent for the color variations. And you can come up with some pretty spectacular results. Uh, let's see, where am I here? So again, this is the Rhododendron occidental, the California deciduous azalea. And this one also was in Sonoma County, a very interesting area called the Cedars, which is full not of cedars, but is a upwelling of alkaline rock. And even so, along the stream beds, the azaleas grow because apparently along the stream beds, it's more acidic. And so you can get these spectacular little guys growing. Uh, these are not very available in the nursery trade. It's very hard to find them, although you may be able to find it at one of the native plant nurseries, and worth playing with if you want to experiment a little bit. We're going to turn to camellias here a little bit. Camellias are native to Japan and China mainly. And the Camellia sinensis is the tea plant that we get green and black tea from. And obviously it's widely grown in India as a crop, although I don't know that it was ever native there. But the British, when they were colonizing India, found that in the Himalayan foothills, the tea plants grew very well. And so thousands and thousands of acres were devoted to tea. The Camellia japonica is the most common garden variety of camellia that's grown. And it has great big flowers and big shiny leaves. It's a lovely garden plant. It can grow up to 16 or 18 feet tall, although usually in your garden you'll see it more like 6 to 12 feet tall, and maybe 6 to 8 feet wide. The flowers come out for the japonicas. Most of them start to bloom about now, and some are later, some are earlier, and they will continue into, as long as March. The Camellia sasanquas that we'll talk about in a little bit actually bloom earlier than the japonicas, and they're in full bloom now, and some of them are even finished and aren't blooming any longer. Camellias can handle almost full sun, and I've actually seen them growing in full sun in the Central Valley. They must have had plenty of water during the course, but also probably were growing when the water tables were high enough that in the summer they were reaching water. But they're extremely hardy, extremely adaptable, and you can grow them probably to best advantage in morning sun or filtered sun, but you could even try it in hotter locations as long as you're able to water them well during the first 10 years of their life in the summer. Maybe after that they wouldn't need much water. The colors are spectacular. The flower shapes are spectacular. This is Tom Knudsen. I don't know what to say. It's just a gorgeous flower. And another japonica um, that you can find very readily. It's a common variety that does very well. Some of these slightly newer varieties, there are a whole line of Nuccios. Nuccio is a grower. Um, and most of them are fully double like this. So whereas Silver Waves has a couple of rows of petals and a whole bunch of stamens in the middle to give this nice yellow center, flowers like Tom Knudsen and Nuccio's Pearl have been developed or selected so that they're have nothing but petals, and it's a spectacular look, almost mathematical looking, like it's a fractal or something. But many of the Nuccios have this form, and they have different colors: white, solid pink, bicolor like this. But they're pretty spectacular. The Sasonqua camellias bloom much earlier. They have smaller leaves and generally simple flowers. There are a few that have double flowers, but most of them are simple single flowers like this with a row of petals and then the stamens in the middle. This one's called Yuletide mainly because of the color of the red, but also it's one of the early bloomers and will generally be blooming about Christmas time. So you can count on it as a nice early bloomers. The downside, if there is one, to Sasonqua camellias as opposed to japonicas is that the petals on Sasonquas fall off individually when the flower is finished. The whole flower on a japonica usually sheds at once in a lump, and the petals usually stay together, so it's easy to clean up after it falls off the plant. The petals here rain down individually, and although that's a lovely effect if it's rose petals at a wedding, because of a feature that we'll talk about in a bit, you don't really want camellia petals laying around in your garden to decompose in your garden. They can carry a fungal disease that makes them look pretty ugly the next year if you let that happen. This is another Sasonqua, one of the very early ones, Setsugeka. This one blooms really in the fall. And by now, this plant is completely finished blooming, along with another early one called Apple Blossom. I don't know if I have a picture. Yeah, here's Apple Blossom. Lovely, lovely Sasonqua with a big flower, but very early blooming, and it's completely finished now, whereas the Yuletides are still blooming away. And the flower buds on this is a hybrid. I can just tell by the leaf shape here. This is something in between a japonica and a Sasonqua, but this picture is designed to show you a flower bud as opposed to a leaf bud on a camellia. So the leaf buds are small and pointy. The flower buds are larger and rounded. The buds form in the fall, and so you don't really want to be pruning camellias in the fall because you're probably going to be pruning off the forming buds. You're best off to prune them right after they finish flowering. then they can grow out from the areas that you've pruned, and they'll have time to develop flower buds on the areas that you've pruned back. They don't have to be pruned for flower production, um, and they don't really need to be pruned very much, except if they're growing, if they have any dead or dying stuff, you should take that out. Any diseased material you should take out, and light trimming just for shape, especially when they're young, if they're sending out really aggressive stems in a certain direction and you want to just tamp them down a little bit, cut them back a bit, tip them off so they have to branch out and calm down a little bit. The adolescents get a little wild, and you have to calm them down. Sometimes camellias are called shade roses, and because of the shape of the flower and particularly of the bud. This is a really pretty bud. I think this is a hybrid called Taylor's Perfection, which is a beautiful hybrid. And you can see here the buds are just starting to color up. But this one is just about ready to open up. Recently taken, by the way. Now, on your camellias, you'll find these funny little hard ball-like or nut-like features occasionally, some varieties more than others. This is actually a seed pod. So there was a flower here, it got pollinated, and it developed the fruit of the camellia, which is this guy here. And inside, if you broke it open, it's quite hard, and over time, at the end of the summer, it'll kind of dry out and it'll dehiss, as they say, which means it'll split along 3 different seams and open up. And there'll generally be 3 seeds inside. They're dark black, about the size of a kernel of popcorn, or a little bigger. And often we find them little camellias growing in the cans in the nursery. If it's been there for a year or so, one of the pods will have opened up and dropped the seeds into the can, and we'll find a little seedling growing in there. I like to plant those up and turn them into little bonsais. They may or may not ever flower. They may not have a flower that's of any interest, but they make a nice little plant. And this is just showing different sizes. It's a little distorted here, up and down, but this is a 1-gallon camellia, a 2-gallon or a 3-gallon, and a 5-gallon and a 15-gallon. And prices will range from, $20 to $200, $300 for a nice big 15-gallon camellia. And even the 1-gallon camellias, you can find flower buds. It looks to me like there's one here, probably. So they are worth buying small if you can find them, but generally you'll probably want to find one in a 2 or 3-gallon or a 5-gallon. And then if you have a spot where you need instant gratification, you can go for a 15-gallon. They're pretty spectacular. Now, this is the unfortunate result of the fungus disease that attacks camellia flowers. It's called camellia petal blight. And it makes this ugly representation on the petals. And the way you deal with it is simply to make sure that you clean up all the flowers that fall and don't let them stay and overwinter, so that the spores will be in the ground and ready to bounce up from the rain and get onto the flower buds, and then they're there when the flowers open. there's really no chemical way to deal with this in advance. The best thing to do is good hygiene. And as I say, it's not difficult at all with the japonicas because the flowers are generally intact and easy to pick up. It's a little more challenging with the sasanquas when they rain down their petals, and then you just have to rake them up and put them in the green cans. Fine. I would not compost camellia flowers at home. Your compost probably isn't hot enough to kill the spores. The commercial composting that they do from the green cans will be hot enough to do that consistently. But you probably would just be spreading the spores around if you try to do it at home. I think this is just a pretty picture of a, oh, you know what? I went backwards. I'm sorry. This is apple blossom. I wanted to show you the common kind of aphid that gets on camellias. This is a black aphid, and they're one of the few aphids that's active during the winter around here in the Bay Area. We're not cold enough to make them go to sleep, apparently. So they are out and active when the young camellia growth comes out, and they'll colonize usually the underside of the leaf, and they'll cause this kind of curling. If you see that curling or a kind of you can kind of see it here, a modeling of the leaf, or if you find the black sooty mold on the leaves of the camellias, you probably have aphids. The sooty mold develops because the aphids excrete a kind of sweet, sugary honeydew, we call it. It's really aphid poop. And the mold, the black mold, it's not the black mold that can be dangerous that grows in your house. We just call it black mold. Sooty mold is a better name. It grows on that residue. It's not actually colonizing the plant itself. It's only eating the residue of the aphids. So it doesn't directly harm the plant, although if it covers enough of the surface of the leaf, it can shade the leaf, and then the plant's not making as much food as it should. But mainly it's a sign that you have aphids or another kind of insect, sucking insects that's excreting honeydew. And so you want to deal with the aphids. Easiest way to deal with aphids is get yourself what we sell as a bug blaster, which is a little brass device that you connect to the end of your water wand, and it makes a really strong, thin spray of water that you can push in under the plant and on the undersides of the leaves and just blast the aphids off. And if you disrupt their little breeding colony, you'll keep them under control without too much problem. That way you're not using poisons that will also kill their predators. Somebody once told me, well, if you kill off the predators, then you have to be the predator. And it's much easier to let the natural predators do the job than for you to be constantly hunting for every aphid that's on a leaf. So the idea is that the prey animals, that's the aphids, come out first, and then the predators come along later when there's lots of prey for them to eat. So you just want to kind of control the prey animals during the time before the predators come along. And if you kind of go at it with that mindset, that I'm just a temporary predator here until my friends come along, then you just blast them off once a week or so. And then after a while, you'll notice that instead of lots and lots of aphids, you have some aphids, but you also have lots of dead little aphid corpses all over the leaves, and then some of my friends, the parasitic wasps, have come along and they're doing the job on the aphids, and I can see that. So, observe and cooperate with the friends you have in the garden, and you'll get rid of that. Very, very few other problems with camellias. Aphids can bring along a virus that's called Camellia mottling virus or Camellia variegation virus that causes the leaves to have white mottling or variegation in them. There's nothing you can do about it once the plant has it. It's not going to kill the plant, but it'll make it look different. And I would avoid buying plants in the nursery that have white in the leaves. That means they've already got the virus, and hopefully the nursery people will get rid of them when they see them, but not everybody knows about it. So keep your eye out for that and don't buy them. But otherwise, camellias have few problems. You don't have to plant them up real high the way you do with azaleas and rhododendrons, because they have a really strong, deep root system. The root system of azaleas and rhododendrons is very, very fine, very fibrous, and not very deep. And that's one of the reasons why you want to assure that the drainage is good, because they can kind of easily drown in poor drainage. I hope that's helpful to everybody. There are some friends of these plants, and I want you to focus on things like purus. Look for those in the nursery. Ferns, sarcococa, bigger things like Japanese maple and dogwoods are natural friends of azaleas, camellias, and rhododendrons. And vine maples, which are actually California natives, and there are dwarf vine maples that are readily available in your garden center, do very well with, and I think that's about what I intended to cover. Do we have any questions?
If anybody has any questions right now, feel free to drop them into the Q&A down below. Before we really wrap up, Dan, do you have any advice, any just easy advice on pruning on azaleas, rhodos, or camellias while we're here?
Uh, Azaleas, generally speaking, don't need pruning, except to remove dead or dying or diseased parts. They have so many stems and so many leaves that it's very difficult to make them look better by pruning them. And if you prune into wood that does not have leaves on it, there's about a 50-50 chance that they won't grow out. So you'll just end up with a dead stem. So in general, you don't want to do much pruning at all. You might want to remove the old spent flowers if you don't like the look, if they're sticking around on the plants. Now, rhododendrons are much easier because they're bigger and more open. What I generally do is snap off I don't have a picture here, unfortunately, but I snap off the spent flower stem, being careful not to break the little flower buds that are right at the base of the stem, of the flowering stem. So you just snap it off, and it's okay to prune them again back to a leaf, and they'll generally sprout out behind where you prune. But if you prune into wood that doesn't have any leaves any longer on it, old wood, there's a very good chance that it won't sprout out. So your best bet is to, when they're young, if you want them to be nice and full, sacrifice the first year's flowers in a sense and pinch off the growing tips of the the little growing stems and make it branch out. And then after that, just let it do its thing. You really don't want to fool around too much. Camellias are very easy to prune. They'll sprout out from anywhere. I think I mentioned it's probably best to prune them after they're finished flowering. So that's late spring to early summers, so that they have a chance to grow out and form their flower buds on the ends of the new stems, but they'll also form buds along the old wood. So you can really fiddle around with them all you want. But the first rule of pruning always is, dead, dying, and diseased, get rid of whenever you see it. That's the most important part of pruning, so that you don't have something spreading within the plant.
Awesome. So I do see two questions that have been put in the Q&A box down below. And the thing is that they're kind of overlapping. So I'm just going to give them both to you at the same time. And I think you'll be able to knock them out. And then we'll be wrapping up for the day. So the first one is just, how often do you fertilize camellias? And the second question is, someone has a camellia that's having difficulty flowering. And they were wondering if you had any advice on that while we're here.
Well, fertilizing for any of these plants in containers, I would recommend once a month with either a liquid or a dry type of acid fertilizer between about March and November. And then that's it. By November, they will all have set their buds and should have stopped growing, and you can kind of let them go through the winter. What was the second question?
The second question was just if you have a camellia that's struggling to
Oh,
bloom.
the bloom. Yeah. You know, uh, that's a really interesting question, and probably more complex than it sounds. The
Mhm.
most common problem is they're not getting enough light. And so, okay, you're saying, yeah, but they're shade plants. Yes, they are shade plants, but I have seen groves of camellias under heavy foliage, under trees and on north sides of buildings that have been there for years and years and years, and they just will not bloom. And it's got to be for lack of light.
Mhm.
Certainly not maturity. It's probably not nutritional. They grow fine. They look good. They just won't bloom. And so I think that is probably lack of light. If
Mhm.
it displays any other signs of weakness, let's say, if the growth is not very growthy in spring, if the color is not a good deep green, if they show any yellowing, then there can be some nutritional problems, and you should fertilize them. You can try an iron supplement as well, and that'll also help acidify, because most iron supplements also contain some sulfur, and or you can use the Solpo Mag, will be helpful. 0-10-10 fertilizer in the late fall winter time frame, maybe when you finish with the balanced fertilizer in November, try using a 0-10-10 type of fertilizer, a bloom formula, if you will. And mainly that's going to help strengthen the roots and the uptake of nutrients and that sort of thing. But usually with camellias, if it's not blooming and it's a mature plant, it's a light problem.
All right, awesome. That pretty much covers everything. I did see that someone just asked how often to fertilize camellias when they're in the ground.
Camellias?
Camellias.
Yeah, camellias. Well, camellias in the ground, after 4 or 5 years, won't need very much fertilizer at all, but it's good to fertilize them real regularly. I would say, depending on how you do fertilizer, at least quarterly in the ground during the first 4 or 5 years until they've gotten really well established. Then you can kind of forget about it probably because they're going to be deep enough, and if you keep them mulched a little bit, and maybe in the spring you give them a feeding, and then that would be about it. In a container, you're going to need to feed them their entire life, and I recommend once a month. In a container, most of us, I mean, I recommend that to myself too, and it's, physician, heal thyself. I don't remember to do it every month, or I don't get to it every month, but mentally I say you should do it once a month. And then, that gets you enough fertilizer to get you through the year or get them through the year. Maybe you do it once every 2 or 3 months in reality, but you're thinking I should do this once a month. And if you really do it once a month, you'll probably see a real difference. Your plants will really thrive. Because in containers, the fertilizer gets washed out pretty quickly. Um, Number one, we're using soil types in containers so that they'll drain well and the plants will do well, that don't hold on to the nutrients much at all. And so they really flush through quite quickly. And I, I try to fertilize my house plants very regularly, and I'm better at that because I use something like the Schultz that I just put in the water whenever I water them. But that's difficult to do with a lot of plants outside. So go for monthly in the potted plants, go for quarterly in the plants that are in the ground.
Awesome. All right, everybody. So that'll be wrapping up our webinar for the day.